Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of this real world open source series. And I'm so happy that Mike Cao is joining me today. Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Nicholas.
All right, you're very welcome, and I'm excited about this interview. Could you please just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background, how you got into the tech world and all that stuff?
Sure. So I've been a developer for over 20 years now. I really got interested in programming right out of college. Funny enough, I went to school for electrical engineering, didn't do much computer science, but then I just started programming on my spare time and found it very exciting. So right out of school, I joined a startup. That was back in the 2000s. So after the dot-com crash, they went under, but I just kept with it and I just kept programming ever since. I did a lot of full stack work. I worked for a lot of startups, operations. I even did consulting for a long time. And eventually I landed at Adobe on the front end team, working with a lot of React technology. And so probably like 5 years ago or so is when I really got into React. I was looking at different technology and it was a toss up between Angular and React. And luckily I went with React because that's what seemed to have really taken off. It seems to be the popular framework.
That stuck around for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So that was really good.
It's super interesting that you went to university for electrical engineering. I mean, I think in my university, we had some classes about these logic gates and things like this. Is that how I can imagine studying electrical engineering, that you work with these logic gates and you probably also learn about just like the physical foundation of computer science, basically how ones and zeros are being transmitted across machines and like within and like processed within the same machine.
Yeah, exactly. It's dealing with a lot of logic gates. You're actually building hardware once you get into the upper classes, putting together chips and microchips. Yeah, and us in my coursework, I only had one programming class, and that was like Pascal, Introduction to Pascal. And then the rest of the coursework was, physics and math and, actual hardware stuff.
I see. All right. Can you tell us a little bit about Umami? What is it and how did you come up with the idea for it?
Yeah, so Umami is an open source web analytics platform. So it's something that can help you measure your website, page views and visitors, and give you more insights into, who's visiting your website, when, and all of the information you need to, help you improve your content, or maybe just curious about, the traffic coming to your website. And it started out as something that I wanted just for myself. So I'm always building open source projects, side projects. So it was just another side project. At the time, I was running a bunch of personal websites, some sites for my programming projects, and I was using Google Analytics like practically everyone else in the world because it's free, it's ubiquitous. But I really hated the experience. It was since I had a lot of websites. It was very hard to track all of them at once. It was hard to really, get the metrics I wanted. So I really wanted to build something really simple where I could just see everything at a glance, and quickly access data instead of, diving through different menus and different screens and jumping back and forth between websites. So it was just mainly something to scratch my own itch, something that I wanted.
Interesting. And I can very much relate to that. I mean, I have used Google Analytics a little bit myself in the past, and it always felt like super bloated, very like convoluted of a tool. I never know where exactly I need to click to get access to what kind of metric. And I think the simplicity in there is really what's lacking. And it's great that you were able to start building your own alternative to it with precisely kind of the user experience that you envisioned for your own analytics app.
Yes, exactly. I mean, my focus in building anything is always the user experience comes first, right? You can have all the greatest technology underneath the hood, but if you don't expose it to the user, then really what's the point? So that was my
Yeah, I really
goal
like that.
from the beginning.
Yeah, like thinking kind of backwards from the user experience. What do you want it to be? And then from there, thinking, okay, what kind of application do I need? And then, of course, what kind of tech stack do you need to build that application to fulfill these requirements that you've defined? So, actually, let's talk about the tech stack. How did you pick the tech stack for Umami, and what kind of technologies are you using?
Yeah, so Umami is a Next.js application. So uses a lot of React component. So we've actually built out our own React component library that we use
Mhm.
internally. So the application uses Next.js, uses Prisma, of course. We have Zoostan for state management, React Query for making database calls, React Form for managing form validations,
Mhm.
and Chart.js for uh, rendering the charts. So yeah, we use a lot of the open source ecosystem.
Nice. And so, how did you pick these technologies? For example, have you worked with Next.js before, or was that the first time? I mean, you said that you
Yeah.
had some experience with React already. In the early days, you worked with React. Did you just use Create React App, or like kind of what's your impression of the React ecosystem, and why did you end up picking Next.js?
Yeah. So luckily, I got into React really early. So this was before even Create React app was a thing. So it was really diving into the guts of everything, setting up a project for the first time. And yeah, as it went on, you learn how to run Webpack and how to use Babel, and so you're really building up all this from scratch. But then Next.js came along, and I think Umami is the first Next.js app that I actually tried,
Hmm.
and I really just fell in love with how everything was organized and how it did all the heavy lifting for you. Like you didn't really have to poke around Webpack configs all day, so it was just really easy to use, especially with the inherent routing, where you could just lay out all your files and structure, and then it just all works. That's
Right.
the part I really love.
And if I understood correctly, you're not using like a separate backend server. Then, if you need like server side functionality, you're using Next.js API routes or server side rendering, things like this.
Yes, so we just recently upgraded to the latest Next 13, 14, where they introduced the app folder. So we started on Next, I believe, in around version 9. So
Oh,
it was
wow.
still, yeah, so we had all of our code layout already done, and then with the app folder, you know it organized things even a lot better. So we just love the way that all your routes are in the app, and then all your components can lay side by side with the page. When before we just had it in one giant folder called components, which made organization really difficult.
And you started the project on Next version 9. Is that am I correct?
I believe so. Well, one of the very early versions, yes. Yeah.
Wow.
So I started Umami in late 2020.
Okay.
So
Wow. Yeah.
I built it
Three.
from scratch in like 30 days to get the first working version. And then I just posted it out to, I think first was Reddit, and then it got really popular from there. Then someone else had posted it to Hacker News, and then it just really blew up from there. So from there,
So
I just started maintaining the project as like an open source project, not just a side project it was just for me. So I started building features that people requested, and it just really started building from there.
that sounds great. Let's talk a little bit about your Prisma story. I'm always curious to hear kind of how people came across Prisma for the very first time and what compelled them to start using it. And you know already mentioned that you started building Umami back in 2020. I think that was one of the very early versions of Prisma ORM that had been out back then, right? Was it still even a beta version, maybe? I can't recall where exactly we were around that time, or was it just after kind of the first production release?
It was very early on. Yes, I remember like in one of the Hacker News threads, like I believe the CEO of Prisma reached out to me and said, "Hey, what issues are you having Prisma, so it was very early. Yeah, but I chose it because I was looking around at different ORMs. Previously, I was programming in a lot of PHP, and I've even written my own, ORM in PHP. But obviously, you
Mhm.
can't transfer that to the JavaScript ecosystem. So I was looking for something similar, something really easy to use. And then I ran to Prisma, and then I just started using it immediately. And
Nice.
first benefit I saw was because I was starting Umami from scratch. So obviously you start from the base, which is, well, we got to come up with a schema, right? And Prisma introduced the whole schema, Prisma schema file where you kind of work in reverse instead of creating tables on the database and then creating the code. You can just create the schema file and then you let Prisma create the database, handle all the database changes for you. So that was a huge benefit for us.
Nice. And how has your experience been with Prisma overall? Was it mostly a positive experience? I mean, it seems so. Otherwise, I think you maybe wouldn't have stuck with using it. But were there any issues or friction points that you encountered that you needed to work around that you can share with our viewers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, since we've stuck with Prisma, we really love it. I mean, it's done so much for us. It's saved us a lot of time in writing, custom queries. We could just rely on the Prisma functionality, and especially with the built-in type safety, where we can just, bring up in your IDE, like here's all the types. Then you have every, table defined for you, so it's really easy to use. And for our project, we've had a lot of releases over time, and
Mhm.
a huge benefit of Prisma was the migration support. So, especially when you're dealing with a lot of users with potentially a lot of different, you know, OSs and databases, it's very hard to, cover every corner case. And
Mhm.
Prisma really helped us with that. So we could just create a migration file, and then in the build step, we just run the migration. So whenever people upgrade, their databases automatically upgrade, right? We don't have to think about it. We don't have to tell them to run these extra steps. We just say, hey, upgrade the app, run build, and you're all set.
Super convenient, yeah. All right, Mike, I'm super curious to see what Umami actually looks like. Maybe you could share your screen and show us the app a little bit, and then we can maybe also dive a little bit into the code base. I think that's what people are typically always very excited about, to see what an application that's built with Prisma looks like in the real world. And especially if it's such a interesting one like an analytics app, I think that also is a special one that we haven't covered here on this series before. All right, I can now see the Umami dashboard. You're running it locally. I recognize the port 3000 from a Next.js app. So that's what the application looks like.
Yes. So this is the Umami application. When you first get in, you're presented with a dashboard, which clearly shows all your websites, right? So if you had more than this, you can just see them all at a glance. And if you want to see more details, you could click on more details, and it brings you to this overview screen. So here you can see the common metrics that you would be tracking, which is views, visitors, bounce rate, and average visit time. And you can quickly switch the time period. So the default is 24 hours, but let's say what happened the past week, past 7 days, past 30 days, or even go all the way to like all time and figure it out. So as you're
This looks
making
so much better than Google Analytics to me already.
and the main thing is so much faster, right? Just in one click, you can just update your
Right.
metrics and then scroll through them.
Mm-hmm.
So down here, you see metrics related to the pages, refers. You see what browsers people are using, what OS, what device they're using. And you scroll down. We have a country breakdown of all the different visitors. You see we're popular in the United States, Canada, and Germany.
Also not too
And
bad. Yeah.
then at the bottom, we have events that we track. So beyond just page views and visitors, you can also capture custom events. So, what buttons that people click on.
Mhm.
And so that's what we've done is we've tracked all the different buttons clicks on our homepage. And by the way, these are the metrics for our own website, which we also expose in our live demo. So this is all real and transparent data. And beyond the overview, we also have this real-time function where you could see real-time data coming in. Well, you can't hear it because this is a local host, so there's no real-time data coming in.
How is that real-time data being captured? What does that look like? Can you talk a little bit about that?
This is our website. So if you go to the live demo, it's the same application.
Right. So that live demo is basically the live version of what you just showed locally.
Yeah. So if I go through to the actual production website, you'll be able to see it. So this is the live demo. This is capturing the last 30 minutes of data. So you can see, the individual viewers that are coming in, how many page views they have. Also with the refer page metrics, country metrics. But the main thing about the live demo is that we have this activity log. So as visitors are coming in, you can see exactly what's going on. Oh, here's a visitor from the United States using Chrome on a Linux laptop. And then we mark them with a certain color. So this is the same visitor. That this visitor, went to this page, then maybe jump to this page. And of course, we have all the different events. So here's all the events, but you can see, okay, what pages are people viewing? So you can filter them to that and say, okay, what visitors are coming? And you can also see what events. So I'll say, oh, this visitor clicked the login button. This visitor clicked to get started. So that's our real-time page. And then we
Super interesting.
We also have a reports page where beyond just the overview metrics, you may want to dive deeper into your data to get more information. So that's why we have this reports feature. So you can go in to a particular report and then fill out your parameters and then run the report. So this is a breakdown of views and visitors by country, right? So, and you can slice and dice your data any way you want using the Insights report. And we also have this retention report, which you can run. So let's say November, and then it gives you an idea of how sticky your website is, basically. So if you on November 1st, you have this many visitors, like how often are they coming back? So that's what retention helps. And we also have this funnel report where you can specify what URLs people are visiting. So if you're saying, okay, I want to know if people come to the homepage and then they go to the docs page, then they go to getting started page. And then once you run that, you can see, okay, this many people came to the homepage, and then this is the drop off as they go through the website. And of course, you can build your own paths for your own needs. For, say, tracking conversions. So if you say, oh, someone went to the homepage, the pricing page, and then they did a sign up for my application.
Okay, so you can kind of specify the path that somebody's taking through the website, and here with that report, you can see how many people actually took that path.
Yes.
All right, that's also super convenient. Yeah. That's amazing. All right. That's a great overview. Thank you, Mike. Can we maybe take a look at the code base for this? I'm super curious to see, for example, the Prisma schema. And then like one thing I've been wondering, I think for Google Analytics, you typically also need to integrate some kind of SDK if you're using that in an application. How does that work with Umami? Like, how are events being captured? If I want to use Umami on my own website, how do I integrate it?
Yeah, so all you really need is a small tracking script that you place in the head section of your website. And then Umami will take over and handle the rest. It does automatic collection of data. So you don't have to worry about configuring anything other than your website ID.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. All right, we are now looking at your code base here. And the first thing that I noticed, actually, Mike, I think you're the first person on this show that is not using VS Code. Is that JetBrains? Is that a WebStorm or?
Yes, it's a JetBrains WebStorm. I've used it forever. I think it's great software and it's very productive. Has a lot of useful features. Code Complete is just incredible.
That's great. I used to be a JetBrains user myself. I've actually used Sea Lion, the IDE that they have for the C language and C++ during my studies as well. And then also used WebStorm for a while. But when VS Code came out, I switched over to it. And since then, haven't gotten back. But it's interesting to see that you're using WebStorm and you stuck to it, even though with all the competition that has been coming out since then.
Yeah, I mean, I've just used it for a long time, so I'm just more familiar with all the shortcuts. I've used VS Code. Like, I think it's a great product as well. I'm just not as familiar with it.
Fair enough. All right, what screen are we looking at here? You are currently in the source in the app folder, and you already mentioned that you migrated to Next 14 to the app router. So we are in that app folder, and what are we looking at here?
So you can see the app folder. It's divided up into different sections. So the main is the application itself, and here we have our layout, and then which loads the actual app, and then going to when you look up a particular website, you load the page for that website. All of our page components are really simple. They just load a component. So this is the website details page that I showed earlier. Basically, we try to encapsulate as much functionality into custom components as possible so that when we lay them out, it's just a series of just components that are really easy to view and very easy to go through. So for this particular website details, with the new app folder, we can just put all the related components in, right next to the page. So this is basically where they're being used. We do have a regular components folder, but this is more for global components that are used, everywhere throughout the app. Common components like the error boundary or tables that are used everywhere. We also have a hooks folder. We have a lot of helper hooks that deal with interactivity on the page, as well as handling, authentication or login or just fetching data. These are our custom input components that we use throughout the app. And we also have components related to layout. So we have common pages that we use everywhere, and as well as like nav elements and grid elements. So everything that lays out the components where they should be belongs in here. And then we have a folder called metrics, and these are all the analytics components, basically charts and graphs and bars. Anything where we're displaying the data is on here.
Right, and that's, I guess, where you use the chart.js library, or which library was it that you mentioned initially, which you're using for that?
Yes, it's chart.js.
What is it called?
Yes, chart.js. So here, this bar chart is a component wrapper that we wrote, and it wraps the chart.js functionality. So the base component is chart from chart.js, but of course we wrap the
your custom
initial
functionality
setup.
to it.
Yeah, look, because chart.js runs in the browser, and then you have to set up all of these configurations and options at runtime. So that's what this component is doing. It sets up all this for you, and then, or when you make a certain change to the chart, or swap out the data, we need to update the chart. So that's why you have all these functions that do that. So we have a use effect here when any of this particular data changes, the data set, or you switch the time period, then it goes and it updates the chart.
That's great. Maybe we can take a look at the Prisma schema. I'm really curious of how you've built up the database schema and represented in your Prisma models.
Yeah. So we have this folder called queries where we put all of our Prisma and database access and SQL queries. So under here, under admin is where most of the Prisma queries actually live. So here's all the functions related to websites. So as you can see, we have we have a lib folder. We have a bunch of helper functions and
Mhm.
libraries, and then we have one specific to Prisma here. So our application supports both MySQL and Postgres and
Oh.
ClickHouse. So Prisma has been a huge help in that, and since that all of that functionality is built in natively, and then we
Mhm.
can just run the same query for both databases
Mhm.
and expect the same results. But there are some slight differences, obviously, between databases, like the way they handle dates, particularly. So we still have to be able to work around those different issues. So that's what this Prisma library is for. So there's very specific checks where, oh, if you're Postgres, then we need this format. If you're MySQL, then we need this particular format. Same thing for getting particular date queries. Postgres handles it differently than MySQL. And then we have a lot of helper functions that help us deal with when you're passing in filters so that it cleans it up and then it passes along to Prisma. And we also have
Mm.
this custom raw query function that takes our own raw query and then converts it into a Prisma raw query.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's Prisma library. Under queries, so these are all just pretty standard Prisma queries. It took me a long time to really get used to this kind of format where everything is defined in JSON versus SQL. Since I've been using SQL for so long, I've been tinkering with it, optimizing it. So it's hard at first to wrap your head around like this kind of structure, but once
Mhm.
you get used to it, it's very logical.
Yeah. We took a lot of inspiration from like the Prisma One GraphQL API actually was kind of the foundation for how we then designed the JavaScript API for Prisma client. So that's still a little bit the influence of the company history that we have at Prisma, where we used to be a GraphQL tool, now we're a database tool. But the way how we think about API design, because GraphQL is so intuitive, we thought we want to bring that over to the JavaScript land. But of course, I mean, if you're used to SQL, then you're used to doing things in a different way, and just need to switch your mental model of how to do queries from kind of the SQL to the GraphQL world.
Yeah, and I think the hardest thing to first get used to are the joins, where you're saying, okay, I'm going to get a user, but I also want the user's related roles or users
Mhm.
related websites. Usually that you would do that with a join. But in Prisma, it's actually pretty easy. As long as you have your schema modeled correctly, you could just say include, and I want to include their team websites, include the team. I just want to get their name, right? So you can just, step down and of course, it's all handled with code autocomplete since everything is in TypeScript. So you can really easily figure out, what joins are possible and what aren't.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, here's our Prisma schema. So we have a basic user table, and the user can also, of course, own websites, and they could be a user within a team, and they can also own reports. So this just drives the login system, basically. And then we have this thing called a session table. So this is what tracks unique visitors. So every person that comes in, we hash their properties in order to determine the unique user. So usually we just take their hash of their IP address and their user agent, and then we give them particular random ID, and then we throw all the data away because we
Mhm.
are a privacy focused web analytics solution. So we don't want to keep any personal information at all. So we just take the data we need and then convert it into a way that we can use to identify people, but not actually identify people. So this is how you would get their like browser device information, what country they're from. The website object is basically the website and then the website you want to track. And the website event is actually the actual metrics. So this is what's coming in when you install your tracker, and then you say you want to, and this is where all the data gets captured. And then we have event data and session data. So we have this one website event table that tracks all events, but you can also include data along with your events. So we provide a way to do this with our tracker where you can tag certain elements with data attributes, and those will get sent along with the event. So if someone is clicking, say, the checkout cart button, right, you can send along that, oh, they had 5 items in their cart. So we can track that data as well.
Very nice.
And then
interesting. It's a fairly small schema, actually. I would have expected that for at least like the kind of application that it looks like to be, that still has like a fairly like feature-rich user interface, where I would have expected that you would have a bigger schema and would need to store more data. But it's about like 200 lines, right? You still have here the team user, the team a website in case people operate as a team. But it's really not a gigantic Prisma schema. It's about 200 lines, which I think is like pretty moderate for such a feature-rich application.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty intentional from the beginning. Other than keeping the application itself simple, we wanted to keep the data model really simple as well. I mean, if you do all of the heavy lifting of managing the data, shifting data to the front end, then your data model can actually be pretty simple.
All right, Mike, that was a great overview. Is there anything else that you want to show, or should we start wrapping up our episode here?
Let me show you a few more things. So this is the actual tracker script. So this is what you put in the head of your website that does all the tracking.
Right. Where is this sending the events to? Is it sending them to, I see it's the endpoint is /API/send. So that's part of the Next.js app. That's an API route. And from there, the data is getting stored into the database?
Yes. So let me show you that. So we are still using the old Next.js Pages API. Simply for the API, we've already converted all of our front-end code to the app folder. But the API still lives under here. So then API send would, of course, send to here. So we are fully TypeScript throughout the application. So we define, what kind of payload we're expecting, and we use yup as our validation layer. So we create a yup schema. So then once a request comes in, we can validate it, make sure it's correct. If not, we throw a 405. And then we do a bunch of different checks, and then we get the payload, from the tracker script. So that's basically what the tracker script does, is that so there's this function called get payload, which sends the website, the host name, screen size, length, the page title, and the current URL and the current referrer. So basically, every time you navigate throughout the website, it generates a new payload and then sends it over. So then Umami can track that as a particular page view. So back to the API send, we have two different collection types. So you can collect events, which are just everything that happens on the website would be considered an event. We also collect session data, which is what defines what the user is and their properties. And then once we get all that data, we save the event data. So this calls this a save event function. And from here, so our application supports both relational databases as well as ClickHouse. So anything on the relational side goes through Prisma. Anything on the ClickHouse side goes through its own ClickHouse driver.
I see.
So all of these methods where you're trying to save something to the database, it splits it up uh, using this run query function. So there's one for Prisma and there's one for ClickHouse. And depending on how you set up your environment variables, it knows which one to call.
Super interesting how you basically build an abstraction over, I mean, 3 databases in the end. You're supporting MySQL, Postgres, and ClickHouse. For MySQL and Postgres, I guess there Prisma is helping you a lot. But for ClickHouse, I imagine that you needed to build the entire data access layer, just in an entirely different way again.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of
Wow.
repetition. So this is the relational query itself. So it just does, a website event create using Prisma, sends it all the data, and you're done. Right.
Mhm.
Whereas on the ClickHouse side, there's a lot more work to be done to massage the data into the format that ClickHouse expects. So yeah, you can really definitely see where Prisma helps you out a lot versus where you're having to do all the heavy lifting yourself.
Wow, Mike, that's amazing. That's a really nice and well-written application. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
All right, I think coming up at time here, Mike. How can people help you with Umami, and where can they learn more about the project? Where would you like to send people when they watch this?
Yeah, I mean, our website is umami.is. That's
Mhm.
our corporate website. And from there, we have a lot of documentation to really help people get started. Okay, so this is our website, but we've spent a lot of
Mhm.
time really creating a lot of docs to really help people get
Mhm.
started quickly and easily. There's a very simple getting started docs that'll help you, install the app, whether you wanted to install it from the Git repository or from Docker. I mean, there's many different ways to actually get the app up and running. We
Wow.
have documentation about like basics on how to use it, how to create a user, right? How to share your statistics. So, and we also have this tracker configuration. So this is where if users want to maybe host the tracker themselves on their own website, or if they want to add extra functionality to the tracker, they could do through here. And since the tracker is just a JavaScript library, you can
Mhm.
run the functions yourself instead of headlighting Umami, track everything. If you have any particular custom functionality or custom events that you want to track, you can do it all yourself by just running
Mhm.
JavaScript. And Umami is also very configurable with different environment variables. So there's a bunch of default behavior, but you can disable it. So, for instance, we automatically drop all bots, but maybe for some reason you want to keep it, you can disable that. So, to set up any Umami instance, all you really need is a database URL, and that
Mhm.
uses the same connection string format that Prisma expects. As long as you have that, then you're up and running. And then we also put a lot of time into creating these guides for running Umami on a whole bunch of different platforms, right? So if you want to run
Wow, that's
it,
super comprehensive. Yeah.
yeah. So if you, a lot of our users run on Vercel, so we have that. We also have this very handy deploy button where they could just click that and it makes a fork of our repo and automatically deploys to Vercel.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different guides that we've added, and a lot of these have been contributed by the open source community.
Yeah, it's super convenient. I guess it's one of the big advantages that when you build your project out in the open, that people can contribute and they can write documentation for you with their favorite tooling, right? So that's a super neat side effect of building open source applications.
Yeah, exactly. And we wanted to be as friendly as possible. Last year, we did a huge migration from version 1 to version 2 of Umami, and that required a lot of database schema changes. So
Mhm.
this is where Prisma migrations really helped us out, where people could just run to update their database schema. But we also had to write, a custom script that would migrate data and convert and reformat certain data that obviously Prisma can't do on its own. So we wrote a migration script that people could just run, and then it will just update all their data to the new format.
Was that migration script written in SQL or in TypeScript? I think you could like theoretically do both. So I'm curious which approach you chose there.
Yeah, so we created our own package called Umami Migrate V1
Okay, you even put it into an npm package. Wow.
Yeah. So then people could just go into their folder, run the package, and then it migrates everything for them.
That's amazing. Mike, okay, thank you so much for this overview. I think I learned a lot today. And this is an impressive app that you've built there. I wish you best of luck with it for the future. And thanks for joining me again today.
Thank you for having us, Nicholas.